This is Writers Not Writing, the show where you can get to know your favorite writers and soon-to-be favorite writers by listening to them confess to the ways they procrastinate. Thanks for procrastinating with us. I'm Benjamin Gorman, and the quiet guy behind the glass there is Doug the producer. I write novels and collections of poetry and stuff. Doug tries his best to make me sound better. And each week we have a secret word to listen for. If you catch it, you earn the right to take an extra break at the time of your choosing from whatever is stressing you out. From NotAPipePublishing, welcome to Writers Not Writing.
Today's phrase is Kurt Vonnegut.
Welcome, everyone. Today's guest is Adeena Mignogna. Adeena is a physicist and astronomer by degree, working in aerospace as a mission architect, which just means she's been doing it so long they had to give her a fun title. More importantly, she has a longtime science fiction geek with a strong desire to inspire others through speaking and writing about robots, aliens, artificial intelligence, computers, longevity, exoplanets, virtual reality, and more. She writes science fiction novels, including the Robot Galaxy series, and her new standalone novel, Lunar, which is available as of January 16th. So just came out, or just will come out. It's very soon. She also loves spending her time with her fellow co-hosts of the BIG Sci-Fi Podcast, which I have enjoyed. That is a good one.
Excellent.
So welcome, Adeena. How's it going today?
Great. Thank you for having me here.
I have been excited to have you on. So first thing, we always dress up in costume like this. Tell the podcast listeners who can't see our cool costumes on YouTube, what is it you chose to wear today?
Well, I decided that right now I am Brother Adeena from the Church of the Galactic Spirit from the Foundation series. And so, of course, I am dressed accordingly in their nice red robe-y things that they wear.
The costumes on that show, the kind of the visuals in general on that show have been really
everything
astounding.
about that show.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I really like to think that if Asimov lived to see that, he'd be super pleased with
I think
how
so
this
too. I
came
think
out.
he would, I know that, people critique the way that it is so much more expansive in terms of, hey, it's not all white men, but I think Asimov would be like, and it looks gorgeous, and these actors,
yeah.
I think he'd like it. I hope he'd like that.
Yep. I think I don't think he's the kind of person who would have been upset with the whole taking it, into what modern is. I think he was very much just simply a product of his time. And if he was a product of our time, it would have been fine. So I think he would have been immensely pleased with what he saw. Everything, about him struck me as someone who, if you took his property, yeah, of course, properly licensed, of course, he was happy for people to expand on what he did. He didn't have that feeling like, oh my God, if you change a word, the universe is going to collapse. I think he was very
iRobot, the film version they made of iRobot, where they changed the ending to make it the most anti-Asimov message. I think he would have just been like, oh, come on, that's not the way I see the world. But I can also totally understand why Hollywood was going, a movie about how robots are superior to humans and humans really are not great might not sell well. So we have to have this, human emotions and stuff. And Asimov would have been like, no, human emotions suck. Like,
Although I really enjoyed Bicentennial Man.
Yes.
With Robin Williams.
Yes.
That was such a lovely movie. And again, not entirely holding true to the story of Bicentennial Man, of course, but enough of the elements. And I was super happy with the result. I think he would have been too.
Yeah. That's that's true. And also would have liked to see it done well. I mean, I think that's, I think any author would go, okay, you made some changes, but it did, it did come out well. Well, I went with a similar thing. So folks who are watching can see this. I went with the Emperor Cleon robe armor. So it's like armor, but the purple robe. And I can tell you, I just do not look as good as that actor. Never will. It's just, what is his name? Lee Pace. I am not, anybody who is listening, if you're just listening to the podcast, pretend I look like Lee Pace. Let's just go with that. In your head, decide from now on, whenever you hear my voice, I look like Lee Pace. And that would be really a huge improvement for me.
And I have to say, I'm super impressed with him and the actors that play Dawn and Dusk as well, because they're playing different characters in each iteration. and they're the same, yet they're different. And it's
Just
just
a little.
fascinating to see that work. And to me, that's just such a skill that is
Yeah.
just amazing to me. I'm
Yeah,
blown
to play
away by everything about that
clones.
series.
Folks who've not watched it, these are clones of one another who are different ages, and also
Hmm.
we learn slight variations. And so these actors have to be the same person at a different age as this other actor. And then over the course of time, we realize, oh, and they are a little bit different. And they've done a
Hmm.
great job, those actors, of giving us, how would the same human being, but at a different age, respond to
Hmm.
the same stimuli? And they're very, very smart
Yes.
at that. So I've been excited to have you on to hear about this new book. This Lunar
Hmm.
Logic is about to drop. Tell everybody about Lunar
Yep.
Logic and what this is,
Oh
what
gosh.
this entails.
Yeah, so lunar logic, it takes place on the, like in the title, on the moon about 100 years from now. And my main characters are sentient AI, sentient robots. And at first, it starts out they don't know anything about humans or why they're there. They're just doing what they are, quote unquote, programmed, and they don't recognize that. And of course, some little things happen to disturb their world, and then they start asking questions and deep philosophical questions and figure stuff out. And so it is I wrote it in response to I had listened to a book called it was one of the Great Courses books. I
Mm,
think some people know about the Great Courses. It was called Sci-Fi, phi being for philosophy.
mm.
And I came away with that. And the author there discussed, the Matrix and all these different, things in science fiction that come out as kind of philosophical, discussions. And I came away from that wanting to write a book that would be worthy of having been included in a discussion like that. So
Oh, that's
that's
cool.
where this was. And I'll just say the first iteration, my first original draft was incredibly dark, but I lightened it up. So there's like minimal violence, there's no cursing. It's for adults, but I call it's safe for kids.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I mean, I was a philosophy major undergrad and, and a
Nice.
sci-fi fan. And the two, I mean, frequently we were
Hmm.
going, oh, and
Yes.
the person who best explores this idea, this, Kantian idea is, the Wachowskis or, you
Hmm.
know, we would explore other. I remember in a textbook, they said
Hmm.
the best way to really understand nihilism is to read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Like it is the that kind of
Neat.
absurdist nihilism
Hmm.
is best expressed through, there's no point. Make a sandwich. Like, which folks
Yep.
have not read the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, read it. It will
Must read. Yes.
not just funny, although it is laugh out loud funny, but it really
Hmm.
is thought provoking. So yeah,
Hmm.
I love that kind of thing. It's interesting that, in sci-fi, there's this distinction between hard and soft sci-fi that readers
Hmm.
might not understand. And I think the terms are unfortunate. It's hard science or soft science fiction.
Hmm.
And so
Right.
what you've got is something that is very intellectually challenging. It's just the soft sciences part. It's a
Hmm.
philosophical book that is fiction. That is so up my alley. But was there some tension there for you, being somebody who's, actually knows your astrophysics, to go, okay, but this is not going to be a book about astrophysics. It is a book
Right.
about, AI and how they would learn to conceptualize themselves.
Right. Well, so I really decided that I don't care for the term hard science fiction in general because I think it really does a disservice to science fiction that wouldn't traditionally be called hard science fiction.
Yes.
So if I take my books as an example, and I have another series called the Robot Galaxy series, which similar, there's sentient robots. But what I try to do is then I have the things that are somewhat absurd. Like so in the Robot Galaxy series, there's sentient alien robots. So if you took like R2D2 and Wally and all the fun lovable robots and mush them into one, that's what you have, which is in some ways kind of completely absurd. But then when I have my human characters and they're here in our solar system, I even though it's a couple hundred years in the future, I do everything I can to make it as I'm going to say believable-ish as possible. It's still science fiction, but like I don't do anything that completely breaks what we know. Like, so
Yeah.
the aliens have faster than light travel, and they just do. We don't explain it. We don't say anything about it. But we, quote unquote, we, the humans, we don't.
Yeah.
We have a more realistic projection of where we're going to be for that. So that's to me how I blend it. And when I go back and I think, like, so Arthur C. Clarke, who was a huge proponent of this is what science fiction is, and anything, and it's hard science fiction, everything else is fantasy or science fantasy. He took a very hard line. So we typically tend to think of him and his stuff as hard science fiction. But for my podcast recently, we rewatched 2001. And as I'm watching it, I'm like, yes, similar to what I've done. Some of this would be considered quote unquote hard science fiction. But when you add in his aliens and the sentient AI, no, it's not. It's really not completely 100% hard science fiction. So then I feel better.
Right. Yeah. One of my novels is about artificial intelligence programs asking that question of are we sentient, and how
Mhm.
would an AI program even do it? And so
Mhm.
but similarly, I tried to set it in a setting that is plausible. The challenge for me was what I did was I retold Shakespeare's The Tempest, and
Mhm.
so I was thinking, where would we have an artificial intelligence program that would be powerful enough to be smart enough to be doing this? And I thought, in our kind
Mhm.
of corporate world, this would be the artificial intelligence program of a bank. Like, that's where
Mhm.
we are investing our computing power,
Yeah.
and so which is convenient for me as the writer, because instead of Prospero, I could imagine a bank naming their artificial intelligence program Prosper, and
Mhm.
Prosper then
Mm.
becomes this,
Okay, there you go.
am I truly self-aware? How do I know I'm truly self-aware? And the conclusion that
Mhm.
he comes to is, if my daughter, in this version, Memoranda, if Memoranda has autonomy, then I have created someone who is distinct from me and is not a copy
Mhm.
of me. But how do I know she's truly free, and how do I know she's making her own choices? And so that becomes the kind of linchpin, which
Right.
dovetails with the Shakespearean story. He wants his daughter
Mhm.
to do something that he is presenting to her he does not want her to do, and so that was fun to play with. But I think that is absolutely soft sci-fi, in the sense that we're asking psychological and philosophical questions
Mhm.
rather
Yeah.
than how does AI work? Like, I'm not a
Right.
programmer, but
Right.
how can we translate this to humans? And I think you're absolutely right. I think, even 2001, which is a hallmark of hard sci-fi, it's all about, space travel. No, it's asking, how would humans get along with a robot
Mhm.
that seems to have gone rogue? Seems to have gone rogue. How do you even know if the robot has gone rogue? And that's a
Mhm.
psychological question. So yeah, that's a
Yep.
really good point. It's soft science fiction in that sense, which does not mean easy. It
When
does
does
not,
it, right? It doesn't mean any. So like this distinction, hard and soft. That's why I'm not a fan of it anymore. Because what does it really tell you? Not so much.
yeah,
So in Lunar Logic, in the new book, again, I've got sentient robots and stuff. And they're ones that are born out of us in theory. But and again, do I really believe we're going to have in 100 years sentient robots or AI? No, actually, I don't. But everything else that I do on the lunar surface is a projection of what I think is technically possible over the next 100 years.
it
And in
still
fact, I
follows
do
our
make,
laws of physics, yes.
yeah, and laws, within the known laws of physics, and within also kind of some extrapolations of technology. I made a couple assumptions in that we don't actually make a lot of progress in the
Yeah.
next 100 years, which kind of makes things easier and is at some point not too difficult to accept, because at some point, if people are like, yeah, we don't want to fund this anymore, we don't want to, like,
Right.
then yes, there won't be much. Because, at one point, one of my beta readers had pointed out, because they're in a lunar rover, the humans are in a lunar rover that isn't that large. It's like the size of a minivan. And I think they pointed out, I was like, well, wouldn't they have like roomier stuff? And I'm like, and I was thinking about that, like, no, because actually it's very expensive to do it.
Yes.
So why would they? Why would any? And even over the next 100 years, why would anybody? So at somewhere in it, I kind of snuck in about some bits about how stuff hasn't really advanced, and it's not too dissimilar from where we are.
I was listening to another conversation, a podcast on the Slate Money podcast, where they were talking
Hmm.
about the improvements to the iPhone over time, and
Hmm.
they were making this point that the price point has not changed dramatically, unlike your large screen TV, which is a
Mhm.
1,000% cheaper than when it came out.
Mhm.
But
I'm
the
very upset about that. I spent a
right.
lot of money on TV a decade ago.
Yes, and they're just, you can get them for, $100 now. But
Mhm.
the iPhone has maintained its price because its powers are an order of magnitude, two orders of magnitude greater
Mhm.
in terms of, but what it can do has not dramatically changed. It can take pictures,
Yeah.
it can, and so I think that the way that we track the way technology will advance is it's going to be fits and starts, not because we're incapable of improving technology, but because
Mhm.
things get good enough at what we want them to do. And I can totally
Mhm.
imagine your robots like they're good enough for government work, like they do the
Yep.
job. And so they don't need to be better than that. Not because we can't
Mhm.
improve the technology, because we don't need to after a certain point. It does what we need it to do.
There needs to be some motivation, often economical motivation
Yeah.
for any technology development is generally driven by some form of economic motivation. And if that isn't there, then it's gonna stall. I mean, look where we are just today in getting back to the moon versus where we are, where we were in the 60s and early 70s. And one of my other favorite shows right now is For All Mankind,
I
although
have not
I'm
seen
not 100% up to date on that.
it. No
That's a harder
spoilers.
show to that's a harder show to watch because my husband and I are supposed to watch it together, and finding the time to like watch a show together when we're both like, because I want to be awake for that. I don't want to be like falling asleep. I want to be awake.
I
So,
totally, my partner and I were like, there are shows we're watching together, but not only do we both have to be awake, our schedules have to match. And also, are we
mhm.
both in the mood? Oh, today was a really
Right,
long day. I'm not ready for that.
right, right, exactly. So I'm a little behind on For All Mankind, even though it is entirely amazing, and you can completely, someone in the industry, it's hurts my head how much I can believe that this was
Mhm.
an alternate path.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's good to hear. Like I know that I've been interested in that one anyway, but I'm thinking, okay, if you're saying that is plausible, that they've really been thoughtful about that
Oh, I
information.
think so. Absolutely. And now again, I'm still in the timeline of the show, I think it's still the late 80s or so, but what they had done, and again, it's you look at the what motivated them and what drove them, just little tweaks in the reality and what happened in the 1960s drove a whole different path. But again, everything about it is very plausible to me. That the biggest difference that I see in reality versus that show is NASA's risk posture.
Mm.
In the show, they were willing to take more risks, which means you can do things quicker than you can, and you can do things cheaper and quicker if you're willing to take more risk. That's to me the big difference. Right now, and as far as I've been in the in the aerospace industry, NASA is very, very, very risk adverse, especially when it comes to human lives,
Yeah.
and that drives cost and schedule, beyond all else. And of course, we didn't have the after we did because we were the first on the moon, that whole idea of competition died down. And again, you can imagine that would have still fueled some of our desire to go. But oh, yes, another just great show.
How much of that risk aversion do you think is a reaction to the Challenger? Like, was that,
Mhm.
so, horrifying and terrifying as far as not just the loss, but the PR, the threat to funding, the threat to kind of NASA's existence
Mhm.
that they just
Yeah.
became really cautious?
Well, but they were cautious even before,
I mean, sure, that was
but
a
then they came, more cautious. So yeah, I think that had a lot to do, a lot to do with it. And again, yes, just everything, my experience working on missions that have, tangentially related to the space station. Yeah, NASA cares very, very, very deeply about the health and safety of their astronauts. So and that drives so much of what we do. So
And
much of
do you
what we
think
do.
that will incline them to say, there's still so much we can do without human beings there? A lot more unmanned stuff because you just don't have the same safety concerns. Yes, we
Mhm.
spent 20 billion on this, on this thing, but it didn't. No human died when it crashed.
Yeah.
So,
It's it's definitely a balance because I think a lot of folks, scientists recognize the value of, human eyes and human senses kind of in situ. So there's certainly a balance to be had there. And again, I think generally, NASA understands that balance. A lot of people do. So
yeah.
do as much as you can robotically, but we do need to get boots on the ground at some point.
Well, yeah, and I think there's also this other kind of element, which is not purely scientific, which is, if the human being comes home and is a hero, that's
Mhm.
PR, and the PR
Yep.
translates then into, into funding and more
Hmm.
exploration. And so
Yep.
that balance of, maybe we could have sent a robot, but it's nice to humanize the
Hmm.
exploration of space,
Yep.
and yet we want to do so safely. That's
Yep.
that's
And part of that PR also is in inspiring the next
right.
generation of people to go into any kind of field that supports, space exploration, which is a lot of people think it's traditionally just aerospace engineering, and it is not. I speak to a lot of high school kids, and one of the things that I've been telling them lately, especially when you look at, so the Artemis is the term for the mission that encompasses all of the bits and pieces that are going to get NASA back to the moon, get us back to the moon and then on to Mars. And they have published like a whole list of objectives and different kinds of like science objectives and technology objectives. And when you look at those and break those down and think about what the needs are in terms of like the workforce that are needed for that, what I tell the high school students is whatever you're interested in, there is an overlay of that with space exploration. Medical stuff, yep, space exploration. Civil engineering to like build and construct stuff, you know, any kind of engineer. And again, the engineering, computer science, that's obvious. But all the other things, food science, what astronauts are going to eat and how they're going to sustain is important. So obviously all the biological sciences, how they're, the suits that they're going to wear and the clothing that they're going to wear and materials for that. And it has to be like a set of, form, function, and all that stuff. So there was one kid I talked to who was really interested in fashion. And I was like, well, look, there's an overlay of that, so whatever you're interested in, arts, because communicating everything that NASA does and the vision of space exploration is important. So just whatever you want to do, there is an overlay of that with space
Yes.
exploration.
I have had this debate multiple times with people who are saying, how can we invest in this when we have so many needs here on Earth? And I say,
Mhm.
you don't go to Mars for Mars. You go to
Mhm.
Mars because of what you will learn that will improve life on Earth.
Mhm.
Look at the person who is, as we are having this argument, the person who is going by in their wheelchair is able to do so in a lightweight wheelchair because we went to the moon. The fact
Mhm.
that we could be having this debate on the computer, on our
Mhm.
phones, in our hands, is
Mhm.
because we went to the moon. Like, you go to these places to learn things, and I think we have so much to learn. One of the areas that I'm really excited about is if we could learn about how to keep human beings alive with scant resources on the moon,
Mhm.
on Mars. It's going to teach us so much about sustainability on Earth.
Yep.
How do we improve our lives dramatically because we learned how to keep human beings alive for long periods of time with very, very scant resources, and they had to recycle in some exciting new
Yep.
ways. I think that's
Yep.
that reframing is helpful to people. This isn't about for the benefit of Mars. This
Right.
is for us.
No, absolutely, 100%. Absolutely. There is so much, there's economic impact. The amount of people that get employed in
Right.
this, that is a, very tangible. I mean, again, my career is supportive of this. And again, I pay taxes back in. That's, kind of whatever. But, it's a whole cycle, that kind of feeds in and of itself, and yes, a lot of technology that's out there does have its roots in space exploration and things over the last 40 or 50 years that people don't realize. There's a wonderful website that I'm blanking on the name, but it is a website that NASA maintains about technology transfer, and I'm just blanking on what it is, but it's something like techtransfer.nasa.gov, but that's not it. Spinoff.nasa.gov. That's what it is, where you can see, all the different technologies. I think they even break it down by geographic region too.
Mm.
Like if there's a particular region of the country or state in the US that is involved in producing X related to that. So really they are doing a lot of work to show the general public like the benefits of
Benefit
all of this.
is immense. Like, it is,
Mhm.
I mean, especially when you think something like the internet,
Mhm.
when you think about our ability to compute. I read once that the computing power that was available to put put human beings on the moon, we can now contain in a Hallmark card, one of those Hallmark
Yeah.
cards that
Yep.
that plays a note, and
Sure.
the fact that we have even in my own lifetime, like the computer I had when I was in college is so
hmm
pathetic compared to my phone now. This is so tiny. And this
hmm
is NASA work. This
Yep.
isn't just the private sector saying what, they could have just
Mhm.
slapped fancy, graphics on the side of my Gateway computer. Here's cow
I
print,
remember
and then,
Gateway. Yeah.
yeah, and we'd go, oh, I have to have the new one. It looks fancier. Like, no, the actual computing power was people who were saying,
hmm
but we need it to do new things, and doing new
hmm
things is exploration. Or unfortunately, it's war, and I would much rather have it come from exploration
hmm
than have it be motivated by war.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
Well, we could talk about this all day, but I do want to let
Yep.
readers get to know a little bit more about you outside of work. So,
Sure.
what has been pulling you away from your work in terms of pop culture lately?
Okay. Well, so one of the things that I started doing a couple years ago because I need to make sure I'm getting my exercise in, right? So I have a treadmill, and to make sure I use it, I have actually I bought like a small TV dedicated to the treadmill to make sure I
Smart.
do this. And at any given time, I have a show that I'm only allowed to watch if I'm on the treadmill.
That's a good
So
idea.
so the idea is I find a show that is compelling enough that I want to be on the treadmill. So it was Foundation until I caught up on Foundation.
Right.
And again, have to balance it with shows to watch with, my husband. So it would be For All Mankind, except for
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to cheat on that, right? So right now, so Silo came out a few months
Loved
ago.
it. Oh, so good.
Oh,
And that came to me because somebody, a guest on this show, recommended the
mhm.
books. I read them, just
Yep.
devoured them. They were so good.
Oh yeah,
And then found out they're making a show of this, and
mhm.
was really pleased with that one.
Yeah, I'd been following Hugh Howey for a while because he was originally, again, an indie author like
Yeah.
me. So his story is very inspiring to me. So I read the books a long time ago, and when I found out they were coming out with the show, so for the again, we have all these like choices of like streaming services. So for the longest time, I held off on getting Apple TV because okay, so Silo came out. So Silo was my show for a while. Foundation was my show for a while. And then I was going through like all these other Apple shows. Although I skipped everyone's like Ted Lasso. I've skipped that. I don't know.
Me too.
Something about that doesn't like excite me. But I found some other like interesting shows. There was one called Shrinking, which was just 8 episodes, and it's like with Jason Segel and Harrison Ford plays like this
Oh,
psychiatrist.
yes. Yes,
Oh,
I've
it's good. It
heard
was
this is
good.
good. I have not checked it out yet, but that's
Okay.
one that my fiance has said we should make one of ours that we watch together. I have heard
Oh,
that.
it's so good. And I so wish like Harrison Ford as a psychiatrist existed in real life because I would love him for him to be
Yeah.
my therapist. But so I went through all these things and Foundation, and then I was like, okay, I need something new. Friend of mine recommended this, and I don't know, something about it just clicked, and I'm most of the way through it. It's on HBO Max. It's called Barry.
I've heard of it, but have not watched it.
It's so Barry is basically a hitman who wants to become an actor.
Which is brilliant.
Yes, and the thing is, to be a kind of likable character, he's not just a hitman. He's someone coming out of the military who struggled to find his place back in society and wound up basically getting hired as a hitman because he has those skills.
Right.
So in theory, it starts out where he's only going after bad guys. So to make him, you need him to be like a likable character. Of course, things change, but yeah. So he like winds up in this like acting class because there's a guy there that's supposed to be his hit, and he's just like blown away, falls in love with it, and just yeah. So it is so good and compelling. And if I wasn't talking to you right now, I'd probably be on my treadmill trying to
Yes,
watch
watching
another episode
and getting your steps. Like that's a
and
great
getting
idea.
my steps.
That's I have a treadmill. It is a dust collecting treadmill. I had a period of time I built a desk on it and I would write
Mhm.
on it. And so for a
Oh wow.
while, that was part of my writing practice was, I'm going to get my
hmm
words and I'm going to get my steps. And I was good about it for a while. And boy, that has fallen off and I am feeling it. So I love that idea of this show is only something I can watch when I'm on
hmm
the treadmill. I will think about incorporating that. And maybe Barry is going to be the show for that.
It's
Um,
it's good. It's good. It's so
yeah. So
good.
what else has been pulling you away from your work?
Oh gosh. The days just go so fast because, we talk about work, we talk about my writing, but then I'm a mom of two kids.
Mm,
So I do, of course, when we're, not working, not at school, not at other activities of spending time with my kids.
right.
And we all like to play games. So I have a pretty large collection of not just board games, but kind of like 2 to 4 player, various kinds of card games and strategy games. Like if you think about the old Othello game, we
Yeah.
have that one. Chinese checker, like all these kinds of
Oh, yeah.
games. We have Trouble, because my two kids are 13 and 5.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I kind of have a range.
Yeah,
But
that's
it was
where I
really
am.
funny. One of the ones that we just got, it was a Christmas present. It's Cat Monopoly, but instead of traditional money, you're trading cats.
Oh, wow. So it's not you are a cat. You are
No,
in the cat
it's
business.
It's not it's really funny and it's weird. One of the things I like about it because my younger son can play it too. There's only two denominations of money. There's a 1 coin and a 5. And actually, we found out last year. So my older son is in love with Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Oh, I agree.
So
We have
yeah,
excellent taste.
he made me watch it, and yeah, it's it's
Oh,
it's
good.
absolutely good stuff. Well, so last year for Christmas, I got Avatar Monopoly
Yeah.
and discovered that, in Avatar Monopoly, they only have two denomination of money. They have like a one yuan and a 5 yuan. And discovered this was the perfect for my 5-year-old to start playing
Yeah.
because he can do that level of, simple math. And so it became a much more interesting game. Plus, they have when you choose your piece, you're a character and there's like special powers and stuff. So it mixes up the, traditional Monopoly. While I kind of like it, it gets boring after a while, you know. So
Yes.
all these other like special monopolies that kind of change it up a little bit are kind of fun.
Oh, yeah. I
So
think
the
they're addressing the
cats.
fact that the people who made the original Monopoly recognize
Mhm.
it's a bad game. And so
Yeah.
they're always creating variations that make it a better. The variations,
Yeah.
folks out there
Yeah.
listening, don't play original Monopoly. Play the
Yeah.
variations. They're improvements.
So
Just
in
in terms of game
college,
theory, they're better games.
yeah, in college, me and my friends, we came up with a set. We made our own rules basically, and we called them Crack Monopoly. It's a terrible name, but the idea is like so it makes the game move a lot faster.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
So
there are
some of the
variations where you can,
Mhm.
you can cheat and you're actually encouraged,
Mhm.
but they've figured out a punishment system to keep somebody
Yep.
from just, my fiance got for my son, who is, going to be 20 this summer.
Mhm.
But this fits his sense of humor very well. She got him Barbie Monopoly for Christmas, and it has its own variation that is
Mhm.
more fun. So yeah, he
Mhm.
likes playing Monopoly with his cousins.
Mhm.
Every time we get together, they get out Monopoly. And I'm like, but this is a poorly designed game.
Yeah.
The ending
Yep.
is miserable
Well,
and it goes on forever. And so now
yeah.
they've taken to playing these variations and it's really
The
fun.
variations are a lot of fun. We have at least half a dozen of them or more already,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think.
The Star
So
Wars one
all
wasn't
kinds of
different
games.
enough. I had the
Right.
Star Wars one and it was just, okay, well, the place names have changed, but it
Well,
wasn't that significantly different. But some of the new ones are really clever.
yeah, I have, from like 20 years ago, I have a Star Trek Next Generation one and I have a Space Monopoly one. And they were essentially Monopoly. It's the same thing, just with the different place names. And that's just, again, it's still just Monopoly. But these new ones that are truly variations that they change up. And like, so in the Cat Monopoly one, there is a clear end of the game
Mhm.
because each time you pass go, you have a cat fight
Ah,
and there's a card for that and there's only 8 cards,
yeah.
so basically like 8 rounds of go you're done, and the game is done when the last cat fight is done.
Yeah. So they recognized here's a flaw in our game. It could go on
Hmm.
eternally and miserably when one
Yep.
monopolist already has, it can become hypercapitalism.
Yes.
And you're just grinding against one person having all the resources. So yes, this
Yep.
must have a time limit. That's
Yes.
have you and your kids discovered exploding kittens?
Oh yeah, we've got that. Yep, we've got that.
Yeah.
We haven't actually played it in a while now that
It's
I think about it, but again, it's because we have like
right.
we do have so many games.
Yes, but that one is another really fun,
Hmm.
well-designed game. Like this is
Yes.
fun and
Yes.
funny and has a limit. This is not going to go
Hmm.
on forever, but yeah,
Yep.
it's a kick.
Yep.
So, what news story has been pulling you away from your work lately?
Well, I have Not last several years, unsurprisingly, I'm not a fan of news. And actually it really started even before the last several years. Because if I started paying attention, I'd be constantly catatonic. So
Hmm.
I just can't do that. It doesn't improve my life. But a few months ago, a friend of mine turned me on to something. It's a daily newsletter called the 1440 Daily Digest,
Writing
which
it
I
down.
highly recommend. And it's like just enough to keep me informed without being overwhelming. And also, it is very neutral, as in, here's a summary of key stories that are happening, and here's just the facts you need to know, and here's more, links to more information you want to know more. And they divide it up into like, here's the top stories, here's some politics, here's some business, here's some sport, and then some other just random miscellaneous links. So I can scan that every day and feel like I'm informed.
Yeah.
However, I do pay attention to space news quite a bit because, again, I'm a space geek. It's related to my job. So I was very sad to hear about the Peregrine lander, that mission that was going to the moon. It was going to be the next lander from our country on the moon, and that has not gone so well. So
I've not heard
yeah.
what got in the way. What is?
Um, so after launching, I think there was first a solar array deployment, and then they were leaking some fuel. So a series of things that seem to be at this point very quite unrecoverable,
Yeah.
which is a shame.
Did you
You
read
know,
about that NASA mission where they shot an asteroid? No, I mean they shot a satellite and it hit an asteroid
mhm,
like a bullet.
yeah.
And that I mean that's the kind of story I love. And you can see video of the impact, but I mean
Hmm.
this was a bullet hitting a bullet. Like
Hmm.
the math involved here was just amazing, and it
Hmm.
was just to see if it could be done. So yeah, I love
Yes.
that science news.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that's okay. So where do you go for your space news?
So there is a couple websites I check out, spacenews.com. Spacenews.com, space.com, and spaceflightnow.com. That latter one is more focused on
Hmm.
upcoming and recent launches specifically, where space news and space are a little bit more broad and they have different sections like commercial space, government space, different stuff. And even I think they have like astronomy sections and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that would be cool because there have been some really phenomenal stories in astronomy too with the new
Hmm.
what's the new satellite that has got such
Well,
incredible range.
James Webb.
Yeah, the Webb. Oh
Yep.
my gosh,
Hmm.
those photographs are just
Yes.
astounding. So yeah,
Yes.
that has been really exciting to see so far back. I mean, we're
Hmm.
looking at history in a different way, and it's
Hmm.
been really cool. Um, so what about hobbies? What do does I mean, well, I don't know how you have time. Do you have any hobbies that pull you away from your writing?
Well, I do. And one of the nice things about a lot of my hobbies are they are ones that like you can pick up and leave and pick up and leave. So like I do love to paint. I paint a
Hmm.
lot, but now that, I haven't painted in a year,
Yeah.
and that's okay. And I'll go through for stretches of time of not painting. And then like I might have like a month or two where like that's all I want to do in the evenings is paint. So painting's a big one. And just generally arts. I love arts and crafts. Um, I don't know if I can call gardening a hobby. Something I do like every year because I don't know. I guess I feel somewhat obligated to garden. I don't know what it's like. If I'd call that a hobby,
Yeah,
but
I'm with you there.
yeah.
Like I do it, but I love having the flowers. I'm not particularly I've done the vegetable garden thing, but
Mhm.
it's not I'll literally forget to eat the tomatoes that I've grown. Like most of the flowers are the more fun part for me. But even then, I'm not particularly
Mhm.
knowledgeable about what I'm growing. It is just, oh yeah, this is something that needs to be
Yep.
done. It's that time of year.
Yep. I'm essentially I would call it a minimalist garden. Is I
Mm.
plant stuff and we see what happens.
Right. Yes. Yes. So one of the things I always do on this show to kind of help readers get to know you is, I've scanned for some kind of like Rorschach kind of test, and one that is
Hmm.
fun is to think if you were a character in the Dungeons and Dragons universe, what would be
Hmm.
your race and class?
Hmm. So I used to play Dungeons and Dragons. Again, not a huge surprise given my kind of geeky-ish background. Although not so much as adult. This was for me. This was huge when I was like in junior high and high
Mhm.
school. And I had this one running character. Her name was Talira. It's like T apostrophe
Mhm.
Leara. And I think she was an elf, maybe a half elf, but I think she was an elf. And the name and the reason for elf was because I'm also a humongous Star Trek fan, and that was the closest thing you could get to a Vulcan in the
Ah,
D&D world, even though there's really not close at all. They both have pointy ears. But Talira also was a nod to a lot of Vulcan names are T apostrophe. And so that's why I had chosen it. And so this is like back, we're talking like 1989. I probably created this character. And I was thinking, like, I do want to go find like the character sheet to remember all the details of it. I don't
yes.
have no idea where it is. It's in the house somewhere.
So what is
Um,
but I think the Star Trek universe also creates that same kind of so what is the appeal of Vulcans for you?
well, so I think that was more of a me in high school because
Mm,
I certainly don't identify with Vulcans as much now, but it just might have been because it was something different from being human that was pretty well thought out. Like,
mhm.
so, and again, this is the time when Next Generation was originally airing. And that's all we had was the original series in Next Gen.
Yeah.
Now that we have everything, we have a lot more well-developed things to choose from. But back then there wasn't much. And of course, Spock being a main character,
Right.
and the whole idea of, logic
Yeah.
is very,
But I mean,
I use the word logic in my book. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, what about that appeal? What appealed to you or tells readers about you? Because I think that there's a lot to plumb there in terms of why
Mhm.
does that, logical way of seeing the world appeal?
That's a really good question. And I don't know if I have a well thought out answer other than, and again, maybe my answer is again, me now versus I
Yeah.
would never have thought of this as a high school student is have had over the years the opportunity to read a lot about Stoic philosophy,
Mhm.
which in a lot of ways is, comes across to me as very similar
Oh yeah.
to our initial thinking about what Vulcans were intended to be. Because again, the Vulcans themselves have evolved, and we've noticed that they're not all perfect. Like we've seen chinks in that, like what seemed to be like this one amazing armor. Um, but if we go back to the old school imagining of Vulcan, where it is this like pure, like, adherence to what is essentially a Stoic philosophy.
Yeah.
And I think if you nailed me to the wall and said, Adeena, you have to pick one of the ancient philosophies to claim you want to follow for the rest of your life, I think it would be the Stoic stuff.
Yeah.
Um, the hardest part of that is my understanding of the Stoic philosophy is the eat to live, not live to eat. And yeah, I like to
That's
eat.
that is not you. So on the fly, I'm going to create a
Mhm.
variation here. Instead of your
Okay.
elf character Talira being
Okay.
ambushed in the woods, you are a Vulcan. You are traveling through the galaxy, and you are attacked, but you're set upon by a Klingon bird of prey that is in no way, shape, or form capable of actually competing with the firepower of the Vulcan ship that you have. How do you respond to these Klingon pests?
Well, if they can't compete with what I've got, then I've got to just sit there and let them drain their phaser banks and truly do nothing. And, you know, then go home and
Yes.
tell my Vulcan buddies about the highly illogical Klingons that chose to drain their phaser banks on my ship.
Yes, and I think this reveals something about you. I think
Mhm.
there are people who would say, obliterate them.
Mhm.
If that's not necessary, then it's not the logical choice.
They wouldn't be a good Vulcan, which
Right,
again, there's, as we've seen now, Vulcans have variations like any other, anything else. There's not one, it's not as one dimensional as was first presented.
right. Right. Excellent. Okay, so we're going to go to our ad break, but when we come back, I'm going to ask you what you've been daydreaming about lately. Special announcement time. NotAPipe Publishing has always been committed to helping authors and readers find one another. Well, this show, which is all about helping readers get to know writers, just hit a milestone: 10,000 views on YouTube. So to celebrate, instead of charging authors to advertise their books on the show, I'm going to run your ads for free throughout 2024. If you want to make a 30 to 60-second video about your book, let folks know what it's about and where to find it, and don't forget your name and the title. I'll run one or two of those in our ad spot each week. Just send an MP4 file to the NotAPipe email address in the show notes. Let's fix up some readers and authors into reader relationships. 2024. More readers, more writers, more books.
Hi, my name is Marcella Stepper-Darte, and my debut novel, The Hand of Fate, by Marcella Stepper-Darte, is an epic fantasy. The main character, Mira, is a foster kid who takes care of younger children, and soon she realizes she has to tap into powers she never knew she had so she can protect those she loves. This is loosely based on Norse mythology and started out with me asking the question, what if? The Hand of Fate is book 1 of a trilogy. Book 2 will be The Hand of Ice, and book 3, The Hand of Fire. Please go to my website, marcellastepper-darte.com, to follow the links to Amazon so you can order your copy of The Hand of Fate by Marcella Stepper-Darte.
Welcome back, everyone. So, Adeena, when you are daydreaming lately, what have you been daydreaming about?
Well, this is just going to show, I think, how obsessed I am with writing. Eh, all my daydreams really have something to do with either the active project I'm working on or more likely one of the future projects that I want to work on. And not a day goes by when I don't have to stop and take a note for one of these projects. Everything makes me think of them. It's constant. And if it's not that, then I'm thinking about Star Trek.
Yeah. How do you do your note taking? I wonder. I think that's I mean, maybe we're getting dangerously close to process
No,
about
it's
procrastination,
fine.
but I have become a much better note taker for my novels. What is your mechanism for doing that?
So a couple things. I do sometimes like to write by hand. So no matter where I am, I do have either, a little teeny notebook that I carry, I have these little teeny notebooks that I carry around, or I have post-it notes everywhere. But at the end of the day, I do need everything to be digital because if I
Mhm.
ever want to find anything later. So I use Evernote. Not that the tool is, means anything. People find value in whatever tool works for them. But a while ago, I learned about this guy's name's Tiago Forte. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He has a book out and a whole process called Building a Second Brain.
Hmm.
And it's a method for essentially, at least how I interpret it and I make use of it, is for digital note taking that doesn't just create a mess everywhere that is not useful. He has a way that you organize your basically projects and your folders into, something from like most actionable to least actionable. And it's a whole process. So I adopted his method, and it's not and he even will go in and say, look, this is not like you have to do it exactly this. It's like you can tailor it for you. So I have a slightly tailored version for me, but that's kind of what I do. So I have an area in my note-taking app set aside for what I call fleeting notes. The random notes that just happen, I just shove them in there, and then once a week I go through and I disposition them to where they really need to be.
So smart. So when you were in school, in your pre-college
Mhm.
K-12 education, did anyone ever teach you how to take notes?
I was taught nothing about how to be a good student, and as a result, I was a terrible student.
This is something that has been so remarkable to me. I'm a high school teacher, and
Mhm.
we now teach students, explicitly, these are some different note-taking strategies. And
Mhm.
one of the things that has been so striking to me is Nobody ever taught this to us.
Nope.
I
Nope.
got to college and it was like, you're going to take notes, right? And it was like, oh, I've got a notebook and I've got a
What
pen
does
and
that
I'm sitting at a
mean?
lecture
Right.
and I don't even know how to do this. And one of the
Mhm.
concepts that was never taught to me, even during my collegiate experience, is if you just write them down in a notebook and you don't force yourself, like on a regular schedule, like every week, to go
Mhm.
back and revisit those notes, nothing gets put back into your brain. It's
Right.
just, oh yeah,
Right.
I've exported this information onto this page and then I've lost it until finals time. And now I'm
Mhm.
looking at it, but that process of, going back, and we try and teach students to go back, every couple of days and go,
Mhm.
okay, what questions do I have about what I wrote, and take their
Mhm.
notes in a different way. And so teaching students how to take better notes has made me such a better note taker because
Right. Right.
nobody taught this to us.
And taking, the random notes that I'm talking about is definitely different than if you're sitting in a lecture or a meeting taking notes. And I would, for anyone who's interested now these days, again, the magic of the internet and YouTube is there are a whole bunch of videos on how to take good notes during a meeting or during a lecture that if no one's ever seen that, they should absolutely check that out. But it's kind of funny because I went to my 13-year-old, so he's in eighth grade, and I've asked him, I was like, have they told you anything about this? They have.
Good.
I think it's just still the bare bones, and I don't think he's 13. I don't think he's appreciating how important this is, and so I'm doing my best to kind of, impress upon him a few things that I think will help him
Right.
in the
Right.
future. But of course, like a lot of people, you still just gotta figure it out kind of for yourself.
Yeah, well,
You know,
and it's like we were talking about with kind of the economics of space exploration. It's not until you realize how much you need it that it becomes
mhm,
valuable to you,
yeah.
But
Well,
later he's going to go, "Oh, wow, I'm really glad somebody taught me how to take these notes."
yeah.
Of course, without the absence of the experience of the absence of those notes, he might not realize how valuable they are. But boy, I sure
Right.
feel it. Like
Right.
now I can, this fleeting idea comes to me. And it used to be, oh, I'll jot that on, whatever, a post-it that I will lose. Like that's
Hmm.
not helpful, But that process of going back through the notes and saying, okay, now how am I going to glean information from these
Hmm.
and rearrange it so that I actually remember it in that writing process has been so
Yep.
valuable.
Yep. Well, and it's kind of funny because, one of the things though, going back to that whole idea about the school and, high school and college and such. And I was a terrible student, which a lot of people, when they think about aerospace engineering and stuff like that, they assume we're all straight A rocket scientists, and we're not. We were not. And I was definitely not one of them. Which is in some way like people should understand if you're not a straight A student, it is not the end of the world. You
Right.
can still do these things. But on the other hand, we do want, students to succeed in school. And note taking was only one piece of the thing. Like I probably had like five issues. And the problem was at the time, I had no idea why like I was struggling. And I was one of those in high school, like honors AP students, but like at the bottom of the class, and my grades were completely and utterly erratic. And we couldn't figure out like why. Like it was not an intelligence problem, so like why then can't you just make yourself instantly get straight A's? And when I eventually went back for a master's degree when I was 42, that's when I started my master's degree. That's by then I had figured it out and I knew how to actually
Right.
succeed in the classroom setting.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things. I mean, we tend to say to, for the sake of resource allocation and that kind of thing, it is easiest for the adults to say let's treat all students like they're in the same place. So they're all
Hmm.
14 and therefore they're all going to take Algebra 1. But
Hmm.
that is not the way human beings actually are.
Right.
And, I've talked to my colleagues who, especially in math, where it is, very, staged, and they'll say to me very candidly, this is horribly unfair. We're making this young person feel like you can't do this, when in fact,
Hmm.
what we really should be saying is, this isn't where you're at yet. And
Right.
2 years from now,
Right.
you may flourish, and you may be an absolute whiz. One of my colleagues, who's now one of our administrators, is a brilliant math teacher. But that was because when she was in high school, she struggled. And it wasn't until she was in college and she flourished. And then people said, wow, you're really good at this. And she went on to
Hmm.
get her master's in mathematics. And, whereas a lot of folks, get their master's in teaching, she got it in the math itself. She loves it.
Hmm.
She's very, very good at it. But it was because there was this kind of, she could recognize, oh, I wasn't there when I was,
Right.
14,
Yeah.
15 years old, but I love this and I'm talented at it. So yeah, I think, giving people the freedom to say, this isn't that you're bad. This isn't where you're at yet.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. I don't know where education is going to go in the future, but what we're doing is not sustainable. I think we've been demonstrating how unsustainable it is. And, unfortunately, as a parent, all I can do is just help my kids get through. And I've been, knock on wood, fortunate that, so I've got an eighth grader and we've had no challenges. He's been fine. Actually, to the point where on the flip side, I worry about when the day comes that he does start to struggle, is he
Yes.
going to be able to deal with it? And we actually dealt with that slightly this year because he's actually ahead in math and he was doing the most advanced thing that's available to him now. And it started to be a struggle. And coaching him through that a little bit has been interesting. But
Yes,
then
learning
I've
to
got a,
struggle is important. Like that, that it
yes,
will not all come easily. I have students every once in a while
yes.
where I'm going, this is the reason you are struggling is because it's always come easily before, right? And they're
Hmm.
like, oh yeah, you're right. Like, okay, well, this is an important part of the learning process. It's not
Right.
always going
And
to
will
come
they have the
easily. Good.
skills to know what to do at that point and everything? And then so I have a kindergartner, who just started too. And so the same thing. And in a lot of ways, I think he's going to be similar to his older brother because they're both from, I think, from that academic-y thing. They're both similar enough to me
Yeah.
ish that I can understand and kind of like it's almost like sometimes I can see how their brain is working when they're working out, problems. So on one hand, pretty fortunate there. But they're still young. We've got many years to go. We'll see what happens.
I was talking to a friend who's a professor at Willamette University, and he said the problem with education is not the problem with education. It's that we can't agree on what education is for.
That's a good one.
And
Yeah.
it's, if,
Mhm.
if, if we said we are going to create a system to create educated, critical thinking for the sake of being a citizen, we would
Mhm.
create a school system that works one way. We are going to create vocational education that makes people good workers. We are going to but because we've got, these disparate needs,
Mhm.
we are all over the place because what are we here for? And that's a real challenge. What is
Mhm.
the number one role of schools? In some cases, for some of my students, it's to provide them with food. Like
Yeah.
it has become the place where they are safe and the place where they are fed and the place, but we cannot decide what is the objective of education.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that is going to be a challenge going forward.
And as a parent, different parents have different levels of investment in their kids' education, right? Because there's everything from hands off, not caring, not necessarily because they don't care, but maybe they just don't, they're working three jobs or, everything from that to the other end of the spectrum, kind of what we think of as a tiger mom. And I think I'm sort of a little bit in between. But one of the things that I've struggled with is, I am the parent. So I believe that I am ultimately responsible for my kids' education at this point. But what I ran into this year with the math with my kid, and one of the reasons why I let him do the advanced stuff, so that he had whatever tests they had done in school said that, yep, he can do this. But one of the reasons why I agreed was because, well, at home, he's got effectively a built-in math tutor,
Right.
right? So I'm here. But now there were a couple parts, so he's doing algebra, there's a couple parts he was struggling with. And when I was trying to tutor him, it's like he does not respect me as a teacher. So he won't listen to me. It's like, no, really, I know a few things.
Yes.
I know. So why are you not listening to me? Because like listening to me as a mom is not the same thing as listening to someone as an educator. And I've been finding that incredibly frustrating.
Oh yeah, as an English teacher, and my son would come home, and I would say, "I can help you. I can edit
Mhm.
that essay. I can help, but different roles, right?
Yeah,
No, you're dad, and I don't want,
right.
and so that tension of, are you willing to let me slip into my teacher role? Is that comfortable for you? Or is that uncomfortable because you're seeing me in this different role?
Right.
And so, yeah, that is a very interesting thing to navigate. Well, imagine how much trickier it is when you are the teacher. I got to teach my son in a couple of classes, and it ended up being a really wonderful experience, but it was awkward at first where he would raise his hand and we had to like have a conversation about what are you going to call me in class? And he settled on teacher dad. He'd go, teacher dad. So
That's
yes,
interesting.
it is interesting. Yeah.
My dad was at community college and taught some math. So I never took a class from him, but I remember there was one year, I guess it was my freshman year of college. I was on spring break, but where he was teaching, they were not on break. So I showed up to his calculus class and just to be kind of like as a
Love it.
student. And what was
Yeah.
really weird there was during the break, hearing all the other students talk about Professor Mignogna.
Yeah.
And this was a community college where none of these kids wanted to be taking calculus.
Yeah.
And they seem to take it out on the teacher.
Yes. Yes. It is your fault calculus is difficult, Professor Mignogna.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yes. But when you were a kid, did you look to your dad for tutoring?
My memory is my dad. So my dad was an engineer. He didn't actually get into teaching and working at the community colleges till I was like in third or fourth grade. And he didn't actually teach math. He was more in it was like more of a civil engineering because he was a metallurgist by his
Oh, cool.
degree until I was, much older. And I feel like I have memories in elementary school where he was just normal, like parent helping a little bit. And I do remember having some clashes where
Right.
like he would explain something to me and I was not quite getting it. And, it turned into like a different kind of a fight than had he been like an actual teacher. But what was really, really funny is, so I always assumed or believed he was excellent at math across the board. So when I go to college, I take Calc 1, I take Calc 2, I take Calc 3, I take Diff-EQ. And now at this point, I'm an adult and I can actually ask my dad for help and listen to him, like we're not going to have those kinds of fights we did when I was a kid. So, Dad, can you help me with my Diff-EQ? Nope. And that's when I found out, even though he had been teaching calculus, back when he was a student, he had to repeat some math class.
Oh, interesting. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
That is, isn't that fascinating when, as adults we learn, oh, my
Hmm.
parent is a human being as well. Yes,
Yep. Yep.
that's great. So, changing the subject dramatically,
Mhm.
but what is in your to be read pile? What are you looking forward to that our viewers should look forward to as well?
Oh my gosh, I got a very, 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 very long list. And lately I've been seeing some memes on Facebook that allude to the idea of it's okay to buy a bunch of books that you're not going to read right away, that maybe, the right time and place. And I love that because that makes it takes the pressure off of that list. But I have several Star Trek novels that I want to read. I also have, oh gosh, I have this one book called Pity the Reader by Kurt Vonnegut and someone else. And I think it is intended, honestly, I just bought it on a whim from the bookstore. I think it is intended for, writers and would-be writers on
I
some
have not
craft.
heard that he wrote a writing book. I am gonna.
I hadn't either, which is why I was kind of like, this is interesting. And it was Kurt Vonnegut and with another author too. But yeah, I've got
Maybe
other
like
science fiction
essays and
novels.
then somebody else threaded them together because
Hmm.
I don't know that he ever. Yeah, but I'm going to look for that. Pity
Yeah.
the reader.
And I tell people I usually actually read about 75% nonfiction and 25% fiction. And so the book that I just started and at any given time, I have at least one Audible book, a digital book, and hard copy. Because again, you never know what
Right.
situation. So I just today started when I was driving in the car a new Audible book, and that's usually when I do listen to audiobooks. Something about the periodic table, but it's like a micro history, and I really love like these like I call them micro histories. Ever since I was at a Barnes and Noble, and that's actually the table display they had. They called it micro histories, and there was like a book called Salt, which is like just the history of salt.
Which is
And I
fascinating.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, I like those kinds of things. So there's one just on the periodic table that I just like seriously listen for 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's cool.
There's
I mean,
so much. There's
I
just so
love
much
that.
good
I've
stuff.
always thought you could do a marvelous entire year of like third or fourth grade curriculum just on ice
Hmm.
cream. I mean, the
Oh.
history of ice, how the
Hmm.
Romans were bringing it down from the Alps,
Hmm.
how chemically what is going on. You could make some ice cream over the course of the year. But, yeah, I mean, something like the history of salt is
Hmm.
fascinating. You can learn
Yep.
so much about history. And I think learning about the history of science through the periodic table, I'm going to recommend that to some of my science colleagues too. It's a different way of looking at
Hmm.
kind of your basic science, but it might really engage some students. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool. So where can our listeners find you online?
Okay. Well, my website is ADEENAM.com.
And we'll
And
link to
from
that
there
in
you
the
can
show
pretty
notes so
much,
folks can check that.
yeah. So from there you can pretty much find where I am. I post and I'm most active on Facebook and LinkedIn, believe it or not. And while I'm on like, Twitter and Blue and Threads, really, I'm most active on Facebook and LinkedIn.
Okay.
And now Substack, because Substack has a notes feature too, which is some kind of interesting hybrid of how Twitterish kind of works and things. And yeah, so
Substack
Substack too.
notes. So, but is this on
Mhm.
your own Substack or is this on
On my own Substack, I recently migrated. I do have a email newsletter that I put out every other week. And again, you can find the sign up. It's called the email newsletter is called Beyond the Droid. And so that's on so I just migrated to Substack and then I'm making use of features like their notes.
Okay, very cool. Yes, we'll have to make sure to get links
Hmm.
to those in the show notes, and we'll share those out so people can follow your
Hmm.
Substack there. So before we get to our message, our sign off advice for the world, I've got some folks to thank. So thanks to the artist Max Oakland who reached out and provided one of his songs for our intro song. I prefer the dusk. Let Max know you like it and follow him at Twitter at Max Oakland with 3 Ds. And thanks to Halizna CCO for their song Kids for the ad break. If you're in a band and you'd like your song used on the show, I would love to highlight a listener's work like Max's song, so email that to me. And thanks to Doug, the producer, for making the show sound good and taking the blame when it doesn't. And I cannot forget to mention Writers Not Writing is a production of NotAPipe Publishing. So please go to NotAPipePublishing.com, check out the amazing books written by writers who didn't procrastinate too much. If you like this show, rate and review it wherever you found it. And please check out Adeena's Lunar Logic, which comes out in just 5, 6 days, 7 days. So a week from now, get your copy of Lunar Logic. Tell a friend about it. Give it a review. It makes a big difference. Check that out. And of course, click the little thumbs up for this show as well. It really is very helpful. So, Adeena, what would be your advice for our listeners going into their week? Just something that they can take with them that they should remember for the week.
Well, if you are a writer, then I would say write. And that's the only thing that you should do related to writing is write or write first, not last. If
Yes.
they're not a writer, then very similar. I want to echo what you said. Support a writer. I'm hoping that means you're a reader, and then support a writer.
Yes, yes. That I mean, and there are so many different ways. It's not just buying books. One of the challenges for us is we don't produce a lot of products. And so if somebody
Mhm.
is saying, I want to support Adeena, they can buy your books and then they're done. But there are all these other ways. Give that review, tell a friend about a book. It makes
Mhm.
a huge difference. I
Yes.
also remind the listeners every week that a book without spaces would be gibberish, and our lives need spaces too. So don't forget those spaces. And third, no matter how much you procrastinate, we're still proud of you.
If I take my time